It began when Liam and Sophie found an old music box buried in their childhood home, a relic that seemed harmless at first until the shadows in their rooms started moving on their own. Whispers followed them through empty hallways, and a hollow-eyed child appeared in reflections, always watching, always waiting. What they thought were memories faded into nightmares, and soon they realized the terrifying truth. Some things from childhood never leave, and some fears never die. I never liked the attic in my childhood home. Even when the sun was shining bright through the kitchen windows, the thought of climbing the narrow, creaking stairs made my chest tighten. The attic smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood, though I could never be sure. I would tell myself it was only the smell of an old house, that the dark corners and low beams were nothing more than shadows cast by the single small window at the far end. But deep down, I knew the attic had a presence. It was not alive, not in the way a pet or a plant is alive, but it was watching, waiting, breathing in the silence. And sometimes, just sometimes, it seemed to move when I wasn't looking. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. The house was empty. My parents had gone to run errands, and I felt an irrational need to confront the fear I had carried for years. I carried a small flashlight with me, the kind that barely pierced the shadows, and slowly climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and I could feel the vibrations travel through the thin boards. My hand brushed against the railing, dusty and sticky, as if the air itself was holding the grime of decades. The attic door groaned when I pushed it open, and a cold draft rolled down the staircase, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The light from my flashlight bounced across cobwebs, boxes, and old furniture covered with yellowed sheets. The space seemed smaller than I remembered, the ceiling low and slanted, forcing me to stoop as I stepped further inside. Dust motes danced in the beam of light, swirling like tiny ghostly spirits. My eyes were drawn to a small trunk tucked into a far corner, one I could not recall ever seeing before. Its surface was chipped, the paint faded to gray, and the lock was rusted and hanging loosely. Something about it called to me, a tug of curiosity I couldn't resist. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside there were old photographs, scraps of paper, and then something that made my heart stop, a series of drawings. They were childlike, messy sketches, yet deeply unsettling. The first drawing was of a child in the very attic I now stood in, their small figure huddled near a beam, eyes wide and staring into one corner. Another drawing showed the same child climbing the stairs, a shadow looming just behind them. I felt my stomach tighten. I recognized the angles, the floorboards, the shape of the window. It was the same attic, the same view I had been walking through only moments ago. Then I saw one sketch that froze my blood. It was not a child at all. It was a tall, dark figure, looming over the smaller one. Its body was scribbled in black, face obscured, but I could feel its eyes boring into me even from the page. The more I stared, the more I felt the oppressive weight of something unseen pressing down in the attic. I wanted to close the trunk, to run, but my eyes were glued to the sketches, to the impossibility of what I was seeing. A faint sound made me jump, a soft scraping like fingernails dragging across the wood. I froze. The attic was supposed to be empty. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, moving closer. My flashlight flickered, the beam wavering. Shadows danced along the walls, twisted and unnatural, and for a split second, I thought I saw a dark shape crouching behind a beam. My heart hammered in my chest, and a cold sweat ran down my back. I blinked, and the shape was gone, leaving only the long shadows stretching across the floor. The trunk sat open in front of me, the sketches staring back like accusing eyes. A whisper of cold air brushed my neck, barely more than a breath, yet it carried with it a faint high-pitched giggle. Not a normal laugh, but something warped, hollow, echoing as if it were trapped in the walls. I turned sharply, scanning the corners, the boxes, the piles of forgotten junk, but the attic was empty. Still, I felt it, the undeniable certainty that I was not alone. The air felt heavier, darker, charged with something that shouldn't exist in daylight. My pulse raced, every instinct screamed at me to leave, to slam the door and never return. And yet, I couldn't move, frozen by the feeling that something in the shadows was waiting, watching, patient and deliberate. The giggle came again, closer this time, almost behind me, but when I spun around, nothing was there, only the trunk, the dust, and the weight of the unknown pressing in from every corner. My flashlight flickered one last time before going out entirely, leaving me in pitch darkness, with the sound of that laugh echoing through the attic. And then I heard its soft, deliberate breathing, very close, right behind me. After that day in the attic, I avoided that part of the house entirely. The memory of the shadows, the cold breath, the scraping sound, and that hollow giggle stayed with me, crawling into my thoughts at night. I told myself it had been imagination, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew I had seen something that had watched me, perhaps even followed me, as I fled the attic. Months passed, yet the sense of being observed never left me. It was as if the house had carved itself into my memory, embedding a fear I could not shake, a fear that now followed me everywhere I went. One day, while cleaning my bedroom, I came across an old music box I had forgotten about. Its paint was chipped, dulled by years of neglect, and the key was missing. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I picked it up, the weight heavier than it should have been, and noticed a folded note tucked inside the box. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The words were written in careful, childlike handwriting, but the message made my stomach sink. "Don't follow me." I dropped the note instantly, almost certain someone had snuck into my room. But the house was empty, just as it had been that afternoon in the attic. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, that some part of my imagination had slipped a note into the box, yet the handwriting was unfamiliar, too neat, too deliberate to be mine or anyone I knew. The words felt like a warning, but from what, and from whom? That night, I went to bed early, trying to push the note from my mind. The room was quiet at first, the way it should have been, but then I awoke to the faint sound of music. At first I thought it was coming from outside, maybe a car radio down the street, but then I realized it was the music box, playing softly on my desk. No one had wound it. The melody was a warped version of the lullabies I remembered from childhood, slightly off, like it had been slowed down and twisted. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was the wind, a creaking floorboard, or the house settling, but the sound seemed to move, growing louder when I tried to ignore it, softer when I approached, always just out of reach. My heart pounded and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. Then, from the corner of my room, I thought I saw a shadow shift, a small figure crouching low. It moved differently than any person could move, gliding, silent, almost floating. My pulse raced. The shadow seemed to mimic me, copying my movements with an unnatural delay, as if watching and learning. I froze. My room, my safe space, now felt like a trap. The music continued, looping endlessly, like a heartbeat that belonged to something else. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt as though the shadow was calling me to watch, testing my courage, taunting me with its presence. Then, I saw it clearly, a pale, small face, eyes hollow and dark, staring from the corner of the room. It wasn't human, or at least not fully. Its head tilted unnaturally, observing me with a patience that sent chills down my spine. I realized, in that moment, that it had been waiting for me, for my fear, feeding on it silently all these years. I ran from the room, tripping over the rug, my hands shaking, the music still playing faintly behind me. When I returned later, the note was gone from the music box. I felt a mix of relief and terror, but the relief was short-lived. The next morning, a new note appeared, this time on my pillow. The handwriting was identical, the words more direct. "I saw you." My blood ran cold. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a statement, a reminder that the shadow, whatever it was, had been observing me, even when I thought I was safe. From that day on, I avoided my bedroom at night as much as possible. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside the window, set my heart racing. I could feel eyes on me constantly, always there, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. I began to notice small things moving in the periphery of my vision, shapes shifting where they shouldn't. Flickers of darkness that vanished the instant I looked directly at them. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I could swear I heard tiny footsteps approaching my bed, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was testing my fear before revealing itself. The last night of that week I awoke suddenly to the faintest brush against my neck, like icy fingertips sliding along my skin. I froze in terror, unable to move, and then, the whisper came not in my ears, but inside my head. "You're mine now." I tried to scream, but no sound came. The room was silent, yet I could feel the shadow, always there, closer than ever, its hollow gaze boring into me, claiming me as if it had been waiting my entire life for this moment. Years passed, but the memory of the attic and the strange notes never truly left me. Even when I moved to a new house and tried to forget the old one, I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling that same weight pressing down from somewhere unseen. Shadows in my new room never looked right. They lingered in corners longer than they should have, stretching and twisting with an unnatural patience. The music box never played itself again, but the fear it carried lingered, like smoke that would not disperse. I told myself I was imagining it. That fear had rooted itself too deeply, creating ghosts where none existed. One summer I found myself back in my childhood town. My parents had moved into another house, and the old home was empty, slated for sale. Despite every rational warning, I was drawn to it, a mix of nostalgia and irrational curiosity. The gate creaked when I pushed it open, familiar yet threatening. The garden had overgrown, weeds snaking through cracks in the stone path. But the house itself loomed unchanged, silent and patient. As I stepped inside, the familiar smell of dust and old wood filled my lungs, and for a moment, I could feel the attic above me, waiting. I knew I had to go back there. The need wasn't just curiosity, it was a compulsion, an urge to face the thing I had feared for so long. The stairs groaned beneath me as I climbed, every step reminding me of my childhood, of the first time I had felt something watching me. The attic door resisted slightly, but it gave way with a soft creak. The room was darker than I remembered, the small window almost entirely blocked by grime. My flashlight flickered as I moved forward, and the dust rose in tiny clouds around me, disturbed after years of stillness. The trunk was still there, exactly where I had left it, though now it seemed almost alive. I hesitated, breathing heavily, and when I lifted the lid, the trunk was empty. At first, relief washed over me, but then I noticed the footprints, tiny, childlike footprints pressed into the dust, leading from the trunk to the far corner of the attic. They were small, impossibly small, yet perfectly formed, like someone had walked there yesterday. My pulse quickened, my stomach twisting into knots. I followed the footprints slowly, each step deliberate, trying to make no sound. They ended abruptly at the wall, and I froze. Pressing my hand against it, I felt something wet and cold smear beneath my fingers. It was sticky, almost like condensation mixed with something I couldn't name. My skin crawled. The footprints weren't mine. Nothing in the house had moved, yet there was a record of someone or something walking there watching me. A sudden gust of wind slammed the attic door behind me. I jumped, my flashlight tilting in my hand, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. I tried to open the door, but it refused to budge. I could hear whispers, low and urgent, circling around me. The attic seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in the dim light. My mind raced, trying to convince me this was some trick of memory, of imagination, but every instinct screamed that I was not alone, and then I saw it. At first it was just a flicker in the corner of my eye, a movement too quick to comprehend. But when I turned, there it was, a pale face pressed against the window, staring at me with eyes so black I felt them pierce my soul. The face tilted in impossible angles, and I realized it wasn't fully human. Its mouth opened slowly, forming words that I couldn't hear. Yet I understood perfectly in my mind, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The shadows seemed to grow, stretching along the walls, taking a shape that mimicked the tall figure from the drawing in the trunk. It leaned closer, and I could feel a coldness radiating from it, a presence that filled the entire attic. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My chest tightened as if the air itself had grown heavier, pressing down on me, holding me in place. Then the footsteps began. Tiny, deliberate, circling the room, always behind me, always just out of sight. I spun, trying to see, but the shadows shifted, retreating only to advance again. A low, childlike giggle echoed through the attic, repeating and layering itself until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Panic surged, and I bolted for the door. Finally forcing it open, I tumbled down the stairs, heart hammering, tripping and scraping my hands against the railing. I didn't stop until I reached the front door, lungs burning, chest heaving, feeling the attic above me grow silent once more. But I knew the face had not vanished. I could feel it, still pressed against the window, staring, waiting, and the footprints, they were not gone either. They had been recorded, etched into the dust, a trail left behind as a reminder that some part of me had never truly left the attic, and that the attic, in some impossible way, had never left me. After leaving my childhood home, I thought I could finally escape it all. I moved to a new city, into an apartment that felt ordinary and safe. The building had clean walls, bright lights, and neighbors who kept to themselves. I tried to convince myself that the shadows, the music box, the notes, and the attic had been remnants of my imagination, or perhaps an overactive fear of my childhood. Yet no matter how much I rationalized it, the unease lingered, growing quietly like a disease beneath the surface of my new life. At first it was small things, shapes shifting in the corner of my eye, just for a moment, disappearing before I could focus. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe the city lights playing tricks on my mind. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Even during the day, I sensed eyes on me. I would pass a reflective surface, a glass window or mirror, and for a fraction of a second I thought I saw a small figure standing behind me. When I turned, there was nothing. Then came the notes. I had tried to throw away every reminder from my past, to discard the music box and the attic memories. But one morning I found a folded piece of paper on my desk. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, childlike, deliberate. I never left. My stomach churned, my hands shaking as I picked it up. I had no idea who had put it there. The apartment had been empty the night before. No one had entered. The shadows began to grow bolder. At night, I would wake to the faintest creak of floorboards, even though my apartment had no one else in it. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and a subtle pressure would press down on me as I lay in bed. I would hear whispers, low and unintelligible, circling the room as if someone or something was walking the perimeter of my walls. Objects shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. A mug moved an inch to the left, a book tilted, never in a pattern I could understand. One night I woke to a cold breeze brushing my neck. I had locked the windows, so the air had to have come from inside. My eyes darted around the dark room, and that familiar dread settled in my chest like a stone. And then I saw it. A small figure crouched in the corner, pale eyes hollow, its shape flickering between solid and shadow. It didn't move like a normal human. It hovered, bending in ways that should have been impossible. I could feel it studying me, the same way the shadow in the attic had. My pulse raced as it raised a tiny, skeletal hand and pointed directly at me. A whisper slipped into my mind, a voice not carried by air, but planted in my consciousness. "You will never forget." The words wrapped around me, twisting and curling like a vine, tightening its grip. My body felt heavy, paralyzed with fear, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. The next morning I found another note on my pillow. This one was smeared, as though pressed there with wet hands. "I'm always here." The ink was not fresh, yet it had appeared overnight. I began keeping a journal, writing down every small movement, every shadow, every note, every sound. The act of recording it did not comfort me, only confirmed that I was not imagining these events. There was a pattern, a presence, a life of its own that refused to be ignored. Even outside, the world felt invaded. I would glance at reflections in store windows or car mirrors and see the faint outline of a child behind me, watching. Sometimes it would vanish the moment I blinked. I tried not to look, tried to live normally, but the apartment had become a cage. The shadows seemed to grow with each night, spreading into corners that had once been safe. The whispers intensified, now following me even as I walked through the living room or kitchen. I began sleeping with the lights on, but even then, the darkness had a presence, curling in corners and behind furniture. My dreams became nightmares, visions of the attic, the tiny footprints, the pale face at the window. The same figure appeared repeatedly, pointing, waiting, observing, and always whispering the same phrase, "You're mine now." One night, I awoke to a sensation of being dragged from the bed. My hands grabbed at nothing but air. The shadow stood at the foot of the bed, its hollow eyes staring into mine. I screamed silently, unable to call out. The apartment was quiet, but the presence of that thing was overwhelming, filling the room with a cold, suffocating dread. I realized then that leaving my childhood home had accomplished nothing. The entity, or whatever it was, had followed me. It had never needed the attic to exist. It had only needed me and my fear. And now, it was patient, waiting, growing stronger, feeding on the terror I could not escape. Time passed, yet the terror never truly left me. I began keeping a journal, documenting every strange sound, every fleeting shadow, every note that appeared without explanation. At first, writing it down gave me a sense of control, a way to organize the chaos in my mind. But as the pages filled, I realized the opposite was happening. The presence I had been running from seemed to grow stronger, feeding on the attention I gave it. Shadows lingered longer, whispers followed me into daylight, and the sense of being watched became an unbearable weight on my chest. One afternoon, I was flipping through the journal when I saw something that made my stomach twist. On a page I didn't remember filling, a sketch had appeared. At first I thought it was a doodle I had drawn absent-mindedly, but as I looked closer I realized it was detailed and deliberate. A house, every detail was precise: the window shapes, the creaking front door, even the attic stairs. My childhood home, the one I had fled years ago. What made me shiver most were the figures pressed against the windows, tiny, hollow-eyed shapes, all staring outward, reaching as if trying to escape the confines of the drawing. Their eyes were endless voids, and though they were small, I felt their gaze like a hand on my shoulder. My heart pounded as I understood these were not just drawings. They were reflections, echoes of something that had existed alongside me, waiting, watching, following me from memory to memory. I looked around my apartment. The shadows were different now, heavier, more purposeful. I could feel their movements in the corners of my eyes, slight, deliberate, never ceasing. My furniture shifted subtly when I wasn't looking. Objects moved closer to me overnight. And then, I noticed the air itself had a weight, as if the room had grown smaller, pressing inward, shaping itself to hold something I could not see. I tried to leave, tried to escape into the street, but every exit seemed blocked. The front door was locked from the inside, and the windows reflected not the city outside, but the same hollow-eyed faces from my sketch, pressing and stretching toward me. I realized with a rising panic that the presence wasn't confined to the apartment, or even to MIT, was everywhere, in every reflection, every shadow, every corner that could hold an image. I screamed, but no sound came. My voice had been swallowed, erased from the room, and then I noticed the walls themselves were shifting, faintly, subtly, like they were breathing, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the whispers I had grown to fear. And in that rhythm, I heard it, the tiny, deliberate footsteps, circling me, waiting. In the mirror, I saw myself, or what I thought was myself. Behind me stood dozens of small, pale figures, their eyes black voids, their mouths twisted in permanent, unnatural smiles. They were identical to the child I had seen in the attic, to the figure in my apartment, to the shapes in my sketches. They raised hands, pointing, watching, patient, waiting. And then I understood they were not separate from me. They were pieces of me, fragments of fear and memory, born from every moment I had tried to forget, every terror I had buried, every corner of my childhood I had avoided. I felt my body growing heavier, as though the figures were pressing into me, merging with me, claiming me as they had claimed every memory I thought was mine alone. The whispers turned into voices, countless and overlapping, saying the same thing over and over. "You are ours. You belong to us." I tried to look away, tried to shut my eyes, but even in darkness, I could feel them. Their tiny hands pressed against my skin, crawling along my walls, climbing over furniture, reaching for me in ways that made no sense but carried undeniable intent. My journal fell to the floor, pages fluttering, revealing drawings I had not made, notes I had not written, all warning me, all confirming the truth I had not wanted to face. The last thing I remember was the reflection in the window. The city outside no longer existed. Only their faces, countless and hollow, stared back at me, waiting. I realized then that there was no escape, that the childhood I had thought was behind me was never truly gone, and that the memories I had tried to bury had grown into something alive, patient, and eternal. Even now, as I write this, I feel them moving just behind my eyes, in the corners of the room, pressing against every surface. I hear the whispers, and I know that soon, they will be all I see. And in that moment, I will understand completely that childhood never truly ends, and neither does what you bury within it, because the thing I feared was never gone. It has only been waiting.